Hello world, I'm here to go through with you my very simple strategies for winning at Yahoo Fantasy Football. I don't claim to be the greatest of all time, but I generally do pretty well in every league that I'm in. I've been playing for quite a while, and I don't pretend to be an NFL expert. I don't pretend to have some sort of psychic ability to predict winners, to predict who's going to do well. But I know that fantasy football is about stats, and you need to play the stats. So I'm going to go through with you now how I succeed at Yahoo Fantasy Football. Now, the most important thing in your league, besides being active, is the draft. And the draft is where you set the tone for the whole year. It is where you make your team. I prefer a live draft to a automatic draft because you get to really pick your team as opposed to make a list that is ranked. I don't recommend an auto draft. You're not very serious about fantasy football if you don't at least do a live draft. I don't generally do auction drafts where you bid money on players, but I tend to do just the live auction drafts. So the first thing to pay attention to in your league is in the league settings, which if you go up here to the league, you go to scoring and settings. This is a default league I've made. I'm going to delete it before I upload, so don't get too excited about the password. It's delete before upload. This is Yahoo default scoring and settings. Default roster positions: 1 QB, 3 wide receivers, 2 running backs, tight end, kicker, team defense. I tend to play individual defensive player leagues. Everything I'm going to say about this is going to apply to that as well, but I'm not going to go into it too much here. So you need, when you get to prepare for your draft, you need to pay attention to how your league is scored, because it may give you hints for players that you wouldn't necessarily think would do well for you in fantasy, but what works on the field in a real football game doesn't necessarily work in the fantasy football world. For instance, I don't have it here, but in the offensive scoring, I've been in leagues where I noticed that the commissioner put too many points for return yards. It was something like 1 point per 10 return yards. There's guys returning well over 1,000 yards. That's a lot of points. So I had guys nobody had ever heard of that I drafted in late rounds that essentially won leagues for me. So you need to pay attention to how it is scored, because you can look and see where the value lies in the players. I did a draft yesterday where they set all of the field goals to 3 points, which made my kickers not worth a lot. There wasn't much value in kickers. So I knew that I didn't really care who I had. I was just going to wait till the very last pick to pick a kicker. Now, before I get into the Yahoo specific stuff, there's a few few websites that I'm not affiliated with in any way, but I really like, I'll tell you about. First is FF Toolbox, which is ffranktoolbox.com. They're like any other fantasy site. They do a really good job, in my opinion. And the one thing I wanted to show you here, they rank like everybody else. They rank their players. They have their own opinions. But the one thing they do that I don't know if anyone else does is this right here. They have a 2012 fantasy strength of schedule. This shows you how strong the schedule is considered to be before the season for each team. If you see up here at the top, Atlanta, they are looking pretty good. First for QB, first for running back, fourth for kickers, third defense, eighth wide receivers. That means they're playing teams that don't defend those things very well. They don't defend. QB score a lot of fantasy points against the teams that they play. The running backs get a lot of points. Wide receivers do eighth best. Their tight ends, they don't do very well against, but kickers, and their team defense all does really well. So you got the green here and the red to show you where it's not very good. So you can see that maybe team players are ranked a little out of whack on some lists that you look at because they're not taking fully into account how tough the schedule they're going to play is. Let's see. For instance, you really might like Calvin Johnson this year, but I'm sorry, that's running backs. Let's see. Who is considered a good running back? Steven Jackson, there's an example. St. Louis, 29th hardest schedule for running backs. So Steven Jackson this year may not be as good as you're hoping or as he's been in the past because they're playing against a lot of tough run defenses. So that's one thing I just wanted to point out. Something to consider when you're going into your draft and making your own list for people to pick. Another good website, kffl.com. Kappa Frank left. It is another site that ranks things. I think they do a solid job. It's also ESPN. In their fantasy section, they have football cheat sheets for PPR leagues. Those are points per reception leagues, as opposed to standard leagues that don't give points per reception. They're not bad. I was looking at them before, and I thought that they ranked pretty fairly. It's ESPN. They know what they're doing for the most part. They tend to overvalue some of the flashier guys, but other than that, it's pretty useful website. And, I'm going to focus on Yahoo, but obviously you can play at ESPN, NFL.com, CBS Sportsline, I think Fox Sports, lots of places to play. The last place, and this is a place a lot of people don't go, I really use the NFL.com statistics. Here you can see the real numbers, and these are what matter in fantasy football. Briefly, I'll mention an IDP. In IDP leagues, you often get points for tackles, and here you can see the leaders in tackles. Some guys that people who don't play fantasy or don't watch a lot of football might not know about, like Pat Angerer, Curtis Lofton. I mean, they might not even know names like DeQuell Jackson. Guys that are getting tons of tackles, tons of points in your IDP leagues. So here's a place that you can go and see who is doing well statistically. We'll just go here, 2D passing yards. I'll click complete list. You have to forgive me, my internet isn't the fastest, but okay. So you see sorted now by yards. You can sort completions, attempts, percentage, attempts per game, average yards, yards per game, touchdowns, interceptions, first downs, the distance of the passes, all kinds of stuff. Whatever your league is scoring on, that's going to get you value, you can find here. For a lot of previous years, I generally only go back 1 year unless I know a guy just had a really off year. It's a really useful tool to really look at the numbers. You can't focus on who is on your favorite team, on who ESPN likes on their TV channel. You can't focus on guys that necessarily do really well that are on good teams. You got to focus on who's putting up the stats in fantasy football. So that's going to take us back to Yahoo, which this is something that I don't know a lot of people know. It's very simple. It's in the players section of the Yahoo website. It's a way. It's still based on Yahoo's predictions, but I found that they do a pretty good job. Now, if you go there first, when you first get there, it is ranked how they rank the value of players just based on anything. But as you can see over to the right, under the fantasy points, it doesn't necessarily reflect the value that your league is going to have. So what I like to do, you can see here, you got status, available players, all players right now. If you're drafting, everybody's available. You got position breakdowns, offense, defense, QB, wide receiver, running back, tight end, kicker, and then the stats. Now, the one that I think is very useful for drafting and even during the league is this season proj, the projected stats for the whole season. You pick that and then hit filter. and it's going to show you how many points that they predict they're going to get during the season. And that's based off how many yards they think they'll get. Obviously, injuries, bad seasons, it all comes into play, but I find that they do a pretty good job. This is where a little bit of football knowledge comes in. Maybe you don't fully agree. Like Chris Johnson is a guy that I'm wary of, but he's ranked highly. You could disagree. I'm not trying to get into a big argument in this video about which players are useful and which aren't. My phone, I'd ignore that for a second. So when you're doing this, you click on the fantasy points, and that'll sort it. And you can see here in a Yahoo Standard League, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 QBs. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7 QBs are ranked above Arian Foster, their number one player, that they're going to get you more points. So there's a lot of value in QBs. You may want to pick a QB before you get to your running back. Now, granted, there's a lot of QBs up at the top. Some guys who might not necessarily go, like Matt Ryan, in a first round of your draft. So there's strategy that comes into play. You still may want to pick a guy like Arian Foster here or LaShawn McCoy, because there's fewer, as I go down the list, fewer running backs up here in this top territory. So there's strategy involved, but this shows you where the value is in your league. Aaron Rodgers is head and above everybody. The next closest guy is 66 points away, something like that. A lot of points. I can't do the math off the top of my head. I'm kind of nervous making a video, but so you can see here what the true value of the players is, and that's when you need to start getting into your list and your strategy. You need to draft value. You need to draft the guys that are going to get you points. Don't reach for players. You don't want to pick a guy with a big name if he's not going to get you the points. You don't want to pick ahead of where they should go. Okay, here's an example. Larry Fitzgerald is at 179 points. That's the 48th player on the list. Larry Fitzgerald is an awesome player in real life. He's going to be pretty good in this fantasy league, but he may not be as valuable as some of these running backs and quarterbacks. You really might not want to get him until the third round, and he's probably going to go off the board. So you don't necessarily want to reach in the first round. You want to get the value that's on the board. You want to rank your lists and stick to it. Stick to the value, because without doing that, you're going to have a team full of names possibly, but you won't have the points. And this is about points, not about picking names. Now, an important thing to remember when you're drafting is not to forget bye weeks. I'm going to go here to FF Toolbox. I know that they have the bye weeks on here. I know ESPN does too. Everybody has a list of bye weeks. You can get it on the NFL.com website too. Let's see if I just do a search for bye week. Let's try ESPN. Maybe they have it. It's not important. Long story short, you can find the bye week somewhere. You don't want to. There's two schools of thought here. Maybe one, you just draft everybody with the same bye week. If all your receivers have a bye on week 8, then you have one bad week, you write it off. Or I tend to follow the strategy to try to have guys to fill in every week. Try to draft receivers with different bye weeks. It shouldn't be the determining factor in your draft, but it's something to consider. Because you don't want to have empty spots, and you don't want to have to drop a guy for somebody on the waivers so that you can fill a spot just to win a week. You don't want to give up somebody you might need in the playoffs to win in week 15 to even get into the playoffs. So you need to consider bye weeks. I know that example isn't great. There is no week 15 bye, but you get my point. The bye weeks, It's something to consider. One way to think about it is just try and stack your bye weeks and have an off week. Just say, okay, I'm losing this week. I tend to follow the strategy of trying to have someone to play every week to make up for my bye spots, because realistically you're not going to find every player on the same bye week. That's going to limit you to maybe 6 teams on the biggest bye weeks. That's not a very good strategy, because you're only picking guys from 6 teams. You want to pick value, not players on certain teams. So I think you really want to try to get backups that are quality to fill in for your number 1 guys that have different bye weeks. So another way to put it is, when you reach the point that you're drafting your bench, your backup players, you want to make sure they have a different bye week from your number 1. So if you've got 2 wide receivers you're thinking about picking and they're close in stats, close in projected value, you might want to you're probably going to want to take the guy with a different bye week from your number 1, because he's going to be more useful to you. Especially if he has a bye week different from a couple of your guys, then you can plug him in a few weeks there in the middle. Another thing, draft offense until your bench is full. Unless, with some exceptions, maybe a team defense really sticks out as being very valuable, or you have a weird kicking scoring or anything like that. If there's a different from default scoring, then maybe you take a team defense, an exceptional team defense, or a slightly earlier round. But I find generally draft until your bench is full. Let people waste around on defense, special teams, kickers, because that just means you get a better bench player that you might be able to trade down the line for something you need that makes your team even better. You want to draft the points. You want to have a team that you think is going to do well. Obviously, you shouldn't be a robot and stick to stats 100%. You want to play your gut a little bit. You got to use your knowledge, especially if you know football. Your knowledge plays a role, but the stats are very, very important. So, once you've drafted your team, then you get to where your team's listed in my team. Now, I don't have a team here, but you will get game day decision is a good tab. You can't see it here, but you'll see it when you have a Yahoo team. Game day decision will show you something called fantasy matchup, where Yahoo ranks the fantasy matchup. Larry Fitzgerald again may be playing the Eagles one week, and he's got Nnamdi Asomugha on him, or Darrelle Revis. Might not be the best week to play him, so you're going to see that in the fantasy matchup. There's also places to see projected stats for just individual weeks. Research tabs, they give you little notes. You can't ignore these things. That teaches you how to set your lineup. But another thing, you play your gut to an extent, but you got to pay attention to the stats, what the professionals recommend. They generally know what they're talking about. I feel a little more confident in how I play, so I don't always follow what they say. But if you're new to this, stick to what the experts are telling you, what the stats are telling you. It's going to give you a pretty good season regardless. Maybe even win you one if you just pay attention to what they recommend. Let's see. What was I going to say? All right. Waivers. Actually, before that, let's get to... I talked about strength of schedule. Okay. Waiver wires. Leagues are won on waiver wires. If somebody gets hurt, you've got to be the first person on to pick up a replacement. If you know another guy in your leagues, another player in your leagues, number 1 running back has gone down with an injury. Go to the players, find out who the backup is. Go to the team's website and get the depth chart if you don't know. Find them on the player list, which is the waiver wire, and add their backup to your team, and then make him pay to trade you for that player, because he's going to need them. Or if you have an injury, get on the waivers and get the first priority on these players. You can sort throughout the season. You go to the season total and filter, which is 0 right now. And you can see who's having a good season that maybe nobody picked up on. And you can replace in for guys that your team that you drafted that aren't doing so well. That you think, all right, I'm giving it enough time. This person's not producing. Swap them in. Being the first to the waiver wires will win you leagues because people do not trade. Everybody thinks you're trying to rip them off, so people don't trade very much. Pay attention to injuries. Just be active. Being active will get you wins in fantasy football. So, I think that more or less sums everything up. What I had to say, just to summarize, use expert opinions. Pay attention to the stats. When you're drafting, don't stray from your list. Don't get nervous. Pay attention to the stats. Do not stray from your list. Don't make rushed decisions. If you have a list, you'll know who you want. In the draft thing, they have a MyQ. It doesn't hurt to go ahead and rank your players in that, and then you know who you want next. Don't ignore the bye weeks when you're picking. Pick offense until your bench is full, unless you have some scoring that makes defense really valuable, something like that. Pay attention to the projected stats once you have your team, fantasy matchups, strengths of schedule, expert opinions. All of that is important. So I'm going to try and make more videos in the future if people would stop text messaging me. That's that whistling sound. I'm going to try and make more videos in the future breaking down my thoughts on each week, on what players I want to play every week, where people can post questions to me in the comments and I can tell them who I think they should play. I'm going to try and get to a lot of that. I'm also going to try to record a few of my drafts so you can see how I draft. So thanks for watching. This video has been plenty long. Everybody have a nice day as soon as I figure out how to close this.